And I'm going to throw this in, even though it has nothing to do with the game, but it is an interesting tidbit. You have Bill Belichick very recently giving comments about salary cap constraints being a reason behind why the team lacks depth. And those weren't lacks depth, sorry. And those comments were not received well by a lot of people because it sounds like excuse making. The salary cap is the salary cap. And sure, they currently have a large number because of all of the COVID opt-outs. So it is not necessarily representative of the challenges they were facing. They still failed this offseason regardless of their cap constraints. They did not address enough needs by a mile to make this a consistently dependable competitive team.
Yeah, and well, I think the biggest thing to me is looking back on that draft. It's honestly, I get where they went with their picks. I thought safety, okay, it's not an immediate need, but you see long in the tooth for Devin McCourty. You just traded Deron Harmon. Patrick Chung is opting out and flirting with retirement every offseason now. So I saw the need at safety. Then they double dip at tight end. They double dip at linebacker. Okay, fine. All of that is fine. Going the 7 rounds of that draft without taking a single wide receiver is a detriment. That it's a mistake. There's no other way to put it, especially in a draft that was very, very deep at wide receiver, where you could have had some options there on day 3, early day 3, mid day 3, to pick up some guys that could contribute and could really, especially in this situation where you have everybody hurt, that it could get on the field and make some plays. I mean, it's just the negligence at the wide receiver position and using that excuse of, well, we used a first on Harry and a second on Sanu. That's also hogwash. Listen, like, you got to throw assets at a position. You got to invest in a spot. You can't just take one receiver in the first round and say, problems fixed, right? You can't do that. So I can go back, and I'm not going to go back and play armchair GM and say they could have had this guy, they could have had that guy. My point just being is you could have had any guy in that point of the draft after you made your picks that you like the guys you like. You like Duggar, you like Uche, you like the tight ends, fine. Go ahead and take those guys. But then after that point, you should be investing in the wide receiver position. And the fact that they didn't take multiple wide receivers in last year's draft and the draft before that shows you why they have so many problems, because they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And that's really, it's painful.
And that's the thing is, I mean, look, they're not the only team that misses. Plenty of teams miss, and this happens. So it's an unknown. Okay, you can criticize the Harry pick all you want, and everybody has and will probably continue to. But again, you're right, is you have to recognize almost right away that didn't work. I don't know if this is the thing, so we got to keep going. We got to keep addressing it. And you don't want to play armchair GM, I will. Right before they pick their pick in round 1, you could go up one spot and take Justin Jefferson, who's
don't even get me started on that.
Looks exactly like the type of receiver that you want on your team, and it fits their offense as well. The type of player that he is. And if you didn't want to take Duggar, again, below that, there were other. Again, you could have stayed put. And Ayuk was there as well, and again, same school as Harry. And we've talked about this leading up to the week. A guy who does a lot of the things they thought maybe Harry was going to do later on in that draft in the second round. Instead of Duggar, you have Claypool, you have Chenault, you have other guys who are making impacts on competitive teams or teams that showing early that they're going to be able to be competitive in this league, where you don't really have that right now. You've got Damiere Byrd with his Damiere Byrd. You have Damiere Byrd, but again, you have Jacoby Myers with his 4.63, second slowest 40 in the combine 2 years ago, and Harry with his 4.59, not too far behind, obviously not playing here. You don't have the type of weapons that you need to be able to move the ball up and down the field. And
the weird thing is that Jacoby Myers is probably the best of the bunch right now.
By far. It's amazing. He's not only open, Evan. He's open by 15, 20. He's open by 5 yards every time Cam throws the ball.
The thing that's sad about it is that you can go and you can put Jacoby Myers in a productive offense, but if you are unable to put that hierarchy there, right? If you can't build with a number 1 guy or a number 2 guy and then a Jacoby Myers, you're just putting way too much on Jacoby Myers' plate. So I just went back and looked at the 2020 draft, and if you just look at the wide receivers that they could have had on day 3, guys like Devin Duvernay or Donovan Peoples-Jones, the list, Tyler Johnson, who's balling out with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. Bay. That list is pretty long of guys that they could have just taken a flyer on. I love the offensive line depth, but let's look at the kicker in the 5th round. Let's look at Cash Malawia at linebacker in the 6th round. What are the point of those picks, right? When all these wide receivers are sitting there, you need wide receiver help. And again, it's a very difficult science, the draft. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know better than Bill Belichick about the draft, and nobody else should. But because it's a difficult science, you have to take multiple bites at the apple. You can't just take one swing with N'Keal Harry and say, well, we tried. We drafted a guy in the 1st round, and now we're done. So I think that's the biggest.
And you know what? They did it with Harris. Okay? Harris is an example. You had Sony, and you're like, I'm not sure. I like this kid, so they took Damian Harris. I don't know if that was a need based off of what we saw today. It might be, because he might be a person who could be at least your early down back. We haven't seen, or he hasn't been given enough opportunity to catch the ball out of the backfield, but I don't think he's deficient in that area. I think he can play multiple downs on this team, and he could play more snaps and get more touches in general. But yeah, they haven't done it with receiver up and down. And the worst part is the people you do draft, you can't see the field. Again, Devin Asiasi was just left off, healthy scratch last week. He didn't travel with the team today because of a personal issue, and, thoughts and prayers and everything goes out there. It sounds like there was a death to somebody close to him, but I don't know if he was playing one way or the other here. Dalton Keene was also inactive, again, as you mentioned, out. So, you want to see this guy. You want to see if you hit something here. And again, we're not seeing it consistently enough. Hopefully, that's what happens here in the back half of the year.
Yeah, and I think what you'd like to see moving forward is, from what I understand, Bill has kind of taken an approach with the draft where he has his college scouting department and Nick Caserio and those guys basically handle the draft from the day that the last draft ends all the way up until the Patriots season ends, whenever that comes. And then at that point in time, he sort of takes over the draft process. He reads all their scouting reports. He sees their boards and how they have stacked players. And then what's happening, from what I've been told and others have been told, is that Bill gets hung up on guys. He gets really latched onto guys where he says, okay, Kyle Duggar, I love this kid. I saw him down at the Senior Bowl. He balled out down there. He's got great tape, even if it's at the D2 level. This is my guy. I'm taking him, right? And that's really what we've seen throughout the last couple of drafts, is that Bill, when they made the Georgia picks, for example, Isaiah Wynn and Sony Michel, what they sold us on that was, these are two players that have played in the college football playoff, the SEC championship. They've played their big-time schools, big-time programs, and big-time players in big-time games, right? That was what they sold us on. Okay, but what did those guys do on the field? What was their evaluation? What was their athletic profile? What was their future outlook? What position were they going to play? Where were they going to play in your scheme? It's got to be more. They said the same thing with Duke Dawson. Oh, well, he was at Florida in a great secondary with great people around him, and he knows how to play the game and all that kind of stuff. We can't have those guys anymore. They need guys that have talent. They need guys that have skill. And I think Isaiah Wynn was actually really probably the best out of the entire bunch. He's a pretty solid pick in actuality when you look back at it, but it's just that, coupled with the fact that this team can't seem to get them on the field and get them producing early on. Because you watch these guys, Uche is the first one that I've seen out of this draft class where he hasn't looked like the game is too big for him, and it hasn't looked like he's thinking too much out there. You draft a guy like a Duggar or an Uche or these rookie tight ends who are pretty good athletes that can run and can do some things, but they're thinking all the time. That's going to be a problem. That's going to be an issue. So I think that what we're going to see moving forward is it's not just about drafting. It's not just about player acquisition. They need to realize and refocus how they run their entire operation, because they're not going to have Tom Brady anymore. They're not going to have Julian Edelman anymore. Soon they probably won't have Devin McCourty anymore either. So this needs to be a younger team, and in turn, they need to run the system differently because it's a younger team, right? And I think that's just the biggest thing, that most frustration that I have, is that they're still trying to do the same things that they were doing with Tom Brady,
right?
And they were still trying to do the same things when they had the boogeyman last year, and they had a bunch of linebacker depth and a bunch of veteran players. And what happens? You watch Anfernee Jennings, you watch these guys, these younger players try to fill those shoes, and they're in cement because they're thinking too much and they have no idea where they're supposed to be going, or their responsibility changes, 2-3 different ways depending on the play call and depending on the way the offense moves and things like that. It's got to be dumbed down. It's got to be simplified for younger players, and they have to allow the talent on the team that they are drafting and they are developing to shine through over the scheme. And I think they've gotten too caught up in the minutia of the scheme lately, and that's, I think, an extremely frustrating thing to watch, because they knew that this was going to be sort of an overhaul. They knew that this was going to be a different quarterback. They knew that they were going to be implementing different pieces, and they've just until the second half today, it's been too complex.
Well, what's most amazing to me about this particular rookie class, and the fact that so many rookies have been slow to develop and see the field, is that if you are drafting guys that are Belichick type guys and guys who you think played in big time systems, all of the stuff that you just mentioned shouldn't be there. They should be more ready to play on day one than they will be stars 2 and 3 years down the road by that thinking. You're bringing in people who understand football and can contribute more quickly because they are more evolved. And that's the opposite of what we're getting here. You're bringing in people who may not have been that highly regarded to begin with and are also slow to pick it up. When you do that, why not take a shot at that top tier talent and you get him to figure it out when they get here? If your guys can't see the field because they're not getting it right now, that means you missed in 2 directions there. So again, it's easy to kill Bill. I don't want you to look at the chat here because there's a lot of people that want you to be general manager.
No, you don't want that. Although if I was general manager in my defense, then Lamar Jackson would be the quarterback of the Patriots. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So that's the thing. We've talked about we talked about the coach, the players he wants to coach. He does have his guys who he looks at in the college ranks because he trusts their opinion.
And those coaching buddies, he gets them on the horn. He says, "All right, guys,
tell me about this kid."
Right? Tell me who your kid is? Right? Who's your star? Again, the trade down in the first round to draft a D2 safety, those days are over. You can't do that anymore. You just can't. You can't do it. And I just, that's the frustrating part to me, again, is that they did not change at all the way that they were going to build this team and the way that they were going to do things based off of the fact that they lost Tom Brady in the offseason. They handled the draft and everything else the exact same way.